Thank you for joining Jacob City Fishing, where the goal is learning to live in the great outdoors found as we walk outside of our homes into nature and society. Colossians 1:15 through 23. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. And you, who once were alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, he has now reconciled in his body of flesh by his death, in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before him. If indeed you continue in the faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel that you heard, which has been proclaimed in all creation under heaven, and of which I, Paul, became a minister. Many believe that verses 15 to 20 are a hymn that Paul utilized and edited in order to focus Christ as the head of the body, the church. There is some chiastic structure here, which you can go and study in my How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth series, but it is questionable and debatable. However, the prominent view is that it is a hymn. No matter where you stand with it, it does relate back to verses 12 and 13, where it states, "Giving thanks to the Father who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. He has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins." Paul was stating that the Colossians can please God by giving thanks to him. He also states that they need to be growing in the knowledge of God. And in this section, and for some time, we're going to focus in on the growing in our knowledge of God. Paul clearly, through whether you believe this is a hymn or not, addresses the character and being of both God and particularly Christ. He states in verse 13 that God has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us into the kingdom of his beloved Son. Now, if you think about this, if you really consider what this is saying, is you have become a citizen elsewhere. Now, have you ever considered and thought about what it would be like to move to another country, to get a visa, and to live and ultimately get citizenship somewhere else? You'd have to abide by their laws, their rules, their regulations, and if you do something wrong according to their laws and rules, you'd be arrested, and the consequence of your actions would be based off of their laws. Now, have you ever really taken the time to consider that God has placed us as believers into a new kingdom? Do you really recognize that when you believe in the gospel, just as he's pointing out to the Colossians, that they should know this, they know the gospel, they are part of a new kingdom. Therefore, any of the regulations that they are currently living in, even though they're aliens and strangers in this world, they're ultimately held to the legal account of the new kingdom in which they live. And they are under the authority of the new ruler in which they live. So you almost have an authority above you. Well, you do. You have an authority above you in the country. And then you have the authority above all authorities ruling over you. And the one that you obey is not your direct boss, i.e. the president, but the king of all kings, and you need to follow him. But what does this mean for your life now? How should you live today as a citizen of a different kingdom? That is the big question of the day. Should you live differently knowing you are ruled by the King of Kings? Thank you for taking a moment to consider what God has to say during your adventure outdoors. Please click the subscribe button below along with the notifications button on the YouTube channel so you learn how to survive and thrive in these great outdoors.